Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Her Mentor. So excited to have you joining us this week and so excited to introduce you to our next guest. This week's guest is Gillian Dupuis. You'll also hear me call her Jill a lot in this episode. High level intro of Jill. She'll give you some context around what she does now and her career in this episode. But just a little bit of an intro to Jill. Jill's been working in the tech space for the last 7 years. And in that time, she's moved from SDR to now head of RevOps at a tech company. We'll hear from her that her journey to this place wasn't super linear. She really carved out this new role every step of the way. Her story and how she landed in RevOps is different than any other story I've personally heard or anyone's career path that I've met. So I'm super excited to share exactly how Jill did that. She also just has a wealth of knowledge and advice to share with women in sales. She's someone who I've had the pleasure of working with. She was one of the first coworkers that I really was able to see as a mentor in my sales career. We worked together at the first company that I ever worked at in sales and in tech. And she definitely taught me a lot, whether she knows it or not. She's really been a mentor in my life. So I'm so excited to bring her into this space to share her experiences, her learnings, some really cool stuff that she's done on her own with others. So I will hand it over to me and Jill earlier today. Hey, Jill.
Hey, Kelly.
Okay. Maybe we should redo that. That was so awkward. I made you
I
feel awkward.
No, I kind of liked it as an intro. I feel like it was giving like Barbie Girl by Aqua. It's like, hey Barbie, hey Ken. I feel like that's like how we're going back and forth, and you should keep that in.
I'm so excited to have you here today. From my intro, the listeners already know that we've known each other for the entirety of my tech career, which is kind of exciting.
Almost the
And
entirety of mine too.
minus a couple of years, but you've
Minus
been
a
a really
few.
big part of my journey in sales and in tech and always been a big cheerleader for other women. So I'm so excited to have you here, and you've done some really interesting and exciting stuff with your career. I know that
Yeah.
I awkwardly just gave you a bit of an intro, but I want to hear kind of like a little intro about yourself from you, if that's okay.
Yeah. Hi, listeners. It's nice to meet everyone, all of the people who will be listening to this. A little intro about myself. Yeah, Kelly already kind of gave you a brief overview before this call started, but how I would kind of describe myself, I've worked most of my career, what I would consider my professional career at least, in B2B tech, the B2B tech world. I had a lot of jobs before that unrelated to the tech world. I won't get too much into those, but since I've kind of joined the tech space, I've kind of just like moved very fluidly between like different roles and different departments. I kind of like working for tech companies because you do kind of have that opportunity to touch on a lot of different types of like roles and things within the company. So I've definitely leveraged that in my journey. As you'll probably know from my intro, I started in sales development and I've now made my way over to RevOps, which is very much not a linear journey. I've worked in every department from sales to sales development to marketing to now in operations. So lots of stuff throughout those. And I think really like what drives me in those roles is just like finding different ways to like help improve processes and like the experience for like the internal employees. I think a lot of jobs that you'll find at tech companies are people like doing things for customers, and there's so many roles in tech where people are doing things for customers, and I always felt very drawn to like doing things that are going to help the internal team, because so often like those are where the gaps are. You get so focused on helping the customer that you kind of forget to like slow down and help yourselves for a second. So that is kind of where I fell into operations and just like finding better ways to like leverage the tools in our tech stack and like build out automation and find ways to just like make the team's life easier. So that's kind of what I try to do in all of my roles that I found myself in, and hopefully the ones that I'll have in the future too.
I want to jump in a little bit to your career piece, but before we do that, I do just want to echo that Jill is kind of the master at identifying things that can be improved. You're definitely not somebody who's going to go with like,
Yeah.
this is what we've always done, so let's continue to do it that way, which I think is so important to have in any role, but especially in like an ops role that you're in now. So
Mm-hmm.
why don't you touch a little bit on how you landed in an SDR role? Because that is something that it doesn't seem like anyone is like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
I always wanted to be in sales development. It's normally a story of I had
No.
no idea what that was.
Yeah, no, I'm very much on that boat as well. I didn't know that I wanted to work in at a B2B SaaS company, and I didn't know that I wanted to be an SDR. I was very much just trying to get a job. I graduated. I was a single girl living by myself, supporting myself, and I was like, I need something to make money. And I feel like that's probably going to be relatable to a lot of people. But I definitely do always try to find, like, I think fulfillment is really important to me. So I was looking for a role where I was like, I can see myself at this company. I don't really know what they're doing, but is it somewhere where I can see myself like growing and kind of kicking off my professional career? So the first job that I ended up applying to, that was a B2B SaaS company. They just had a brand that I really loved as like a customer logo on their website. And that's like literally the only reason I applied. I didn't really know what they did. I saw that logo and I was like, wow, I love that brand. I love what they do. I had a marketing degree from school and I was a really big fan of that brand's marketing. So I literally just was like, I'm going to apply here. I don't know what they do, but I want to be a part of whatever they're doing if they work with that brand. But yeah, I applied to the company, and the first job I applied to was actually an office manager role, which is kind of a leap if you're just graduating to be like, yeah, I can come and be an office manager. But that was the posting that was up. So I was like, whatever, I think I can do it. I looked at the job description. I was like, I'm an organized person. So I had an interview with the CEO. It went really well. We kind of had good rapport, but I was not the right fit for that role. It was definitely a blessing that I didn't get it. And then I applied for an SDR role probably like a month or two later. And I didn't realize until years later when the person who actually got the officer manager role told me, but the reason that I got the SDR role was because the officer manager role with the interview with the CEO went so well. He had flagged me in their whatever HR software they were using. So as soon as I applied to the other role, they were basically like, oh, he already approved, so she'll be a good fit for this role. They kind of just interviewed me, and usually the final step is getting like CEO approval, but I already had it. So that was a lesson in apply for whatever job looks kind of like appealing at a company, and like you never really know what that interaction is going to get you in the future. A lot of people, I think, what kind of throw their hands up at like getting rejected once, but I went back and I got the role and I became an SDR. And it was really, really challenging at first. I only stayed in the role for 4 months, but I think it was a really good step in. I would encourage people who don't know what they want to do and are kind of looking for their way into the B2B tech space, like even if you don't think you want to do sales long term, it is just like a really, really good starting point. You're going to get like a full boot camp in like how to sell the product, which is useful even if you move into like a marketing role or a CS role afterwards. Like you cannot start in a better place than being an SDR. You learn the ins and outs of everything and just like will really get your foot at any company. So yeah, wasn't my plan, but it really worked out. And I would recommend it to anyone, and keep applying. If you don't get in the first time, you never know.
I'm obsessed with this story. I've heard it before, but I'm still always
Yeah.
obsessed with it. You found a company that was local to you,
Yeah.
that you were like, this company is really cool. I'm going to apply to this job. That it's crazy too, even the way that you framed that of how you were saying it. I think it's different than how some people would position those kinds of situations. You were like, I'm an organized person. I can do this. I love that level of confidence that you took, because I think a lot of people would count themselves out of a situation like that. But putting yourself
Yeah.
out there for something that you're like, yeah, maybe I wasn't the most qualified for it, put you on the right radar so that when the right fit did come along, that you could take it. And then the other
Yeah.
thing, and this is just like something that I think is going to be a theme throughout, that you are somebody who's just like, I'm going to put myself out there. Worst case, I don't get it, whatever.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that we'll touch on that throughout this conversation. But the other part of that I was like, okay, yes, love this, is taking an SDR role, because it does open up all of these other paths. And that's something that I think out of everyone who started as an SDR that I know personally, like their story in depth, you've definitely had the most like unique journey out of everyone.
Yeah,
Where,
something that you flagged there too, where
yeah,
you said you liked the confidence about the organization. And I think a good expansion on that, especially when you're starting out and you don't know where to get that confidence from, kind of applying to places where you don't have like hard skills, is to kind of lean on those soft skills. Like when you're applying to a role you've never done before, you will not be able to say that you fit the job criteria because you don't have experience in it. But there will always be pieces of a job description that are those soft skills that you can kind of lean on to be like, I've never done this before, but I know that I can because I have X, Y, and Z. And you should always highlight those in any situation. And a good interviewer will also just be impressed that like you are confident in yourself, that you can say that you can do it even if you haven't, because nobody wants to hire somebody that isn't confident to do something. They're not going to let you do it if you don't even think you can do it yourself. So never be afraid to be like, I know I have the skills to do it if you give me the chance, because that's how you get the chance.
obsessed. That is advice that I needed when I was graduating from university because I barely applied to things because I thought that I wasn't qualified enough because I
Yeah,
didn't have work experience. But of course, you don't have work experience. You just spent the last 4
you
years
just
or
started.
however
Yeah,
long.
no
Yeah.
one has work experience when they start.
Exactly. So I love that. If you are currently in university, please do what Jill said to do and don't take my approach
Yes.
that I took. Why don't we kind of switch gears a little tiny bit and jump into kind of
Mhm.
how you ended up where you are now? And I know that
Yes.
there's a lot of factors that went into that. So I'd love to, you
Yeah.
touched on like, I only lasted as an SDR for 4 months. What kind of came next? How did you find what's next?
Yeah. I started, and I should kind of like paint the picture of what the SDR role was like at the time at that
Yeah,
company, because
go
I
for
do
it.
feel like I've seen the SDR role be positioned in different places in a much better way than the way that it was set up when I was working there. When we were doing what I was doing was essentially just like sending a whole crap ton, like hundreds of emails without using any automation tools, without being really allowed to kind of like own writing my own materials as an SDR. And then the goals that we were set at the time were kind of unattainable. Like they were really, really hard to hit, especially where we weren't focused on optimizing like our processes. We were just kind of robotically like sending these emails off, and the emails were written for us by like the managers. We weren't allowed to like
Yeah.
choose what we sent. So as anyone in like a good SDR role would hear that and be like, yeah, no, I can see why she only lasted 4 months. It's not super fun.
It was
And
the
to give
era.
credit to the people in that department too, as after I left the role, I think within like 3 or 4 months, they made all kinds of changes in that role. And it was way, way better for the people who came after me. But just kind of like that environment, as soon as I got into the role, I was like, I gotta be doing something else. I have to get out of this. I gotta move on to the next role as soon as I can, basically.
Yeah.
Um, so I realized just kind of by luck when I was in my probation period, I kind of just like focused on the brands that I'd been given that like I felt I could speak to the best, because that was where I was confident reaching out. I was like, I have something to say to these brands. I'm going to reach out to them. I kind of know who they are. I just kind of used my own kind of like industry knowledge to kind of pick who I reached out to. And I got lucky, and I was able to hit kind of like above average results just by kind of like following instincts there. I think if you happen to be an SDR in an industry you're familiar with, like I was reaching out to like CPG, retail, e-commerce brands as a girl who's just like a consumer at heart. That was easy for me. So
Yeah.
take this with a grain of salt if you're stuck in like the manufacturing industry or something and you're reaching out to
Yeah.
brands you don't know. That sucks. I feel for you. But I just kind of, yeah, I ignored what I had been told in terms of like the volume of emails I should be sending, and then kind of focused on like doing more research into finding opportunities. And I think that's something that I would want to give as advice to anyone starting off in your career too. You're going to be given so many KPIs and like numbers that you have to hit, and no one cares about how many emails you've sent, how many meetings you've booked if you're hitting the bottom line KPI. If you are getting what they have told you as your bottom line, whether it's revenue that you're being held accountable to or SQLs, they don't care how you got it unless you're not getting the bottom line one. So if you can figure out a way to do it better and just kind of like skirt around being like, I'm not going to send 150 emails this day, I'm going to send 75, then you're laughing. So I think know that obviously if you're not doing well, I'm telling it like, don't tell your manager I said this. You have to hit your KPIs, especially if you work at my company and you're listening to this. You do have to hit your KPIs. I'm not giving anyone permission to ignore those. But that's basically what I did. I just found a way to be good at the job while ignoring all of the manual work that I was being told to do. And I started writing my own email templates, just kind of like on the side, and sent them to my manager and was like, I think these are better. Can I send these? And she was like, yeah. So when I did interview for that role that came up about 4 months after I started, I was able to say, I hit my goals by doing all this stuff. I didn't hit any of my activity goals, but they didn't care because I was just doing well. And then I had the extra experience of being like, I have written these templates. I dig into my own reporting. It was kind of like a sales marketing alignment role that I was getting into. It was dealing more with like inbound leads under the marketing department, like top of funnel leads. So they really liked that I was able to write my own emails and kind of do all that stuff, because I needed to be able to do more of that to get into that other role. So that was how I made the jump there. I kind of just figured out which roles could be broken and still finding success kind of at the end of it, and just like really went that route. And I think if you're trying to get an opportunity to move laterally at a company like that, it's good to have shown areas where you've kind of like gone outside your job description already, because I think sometimes people don't like working outside of their job description. They hold it close to them and they're very like, nope, that's not my job. I don't want to do it. But you're going to have a really hard time moving around if you haven't shown that you can do things outside of your job description, and you're like that kind of person who's down to just like try new things. I think that really helped me at that time.
And you, in that SDR role, you weren't necessarily hitting those activity metrics, but you were kind of at the same time showing them a better way of doing
I
something.
was. So I was bringing in SQLs, and I was bringing in like good brand names too. So like they didn't even look at how many emails I sent to get them. They were just like, wow, it's that brand. And like I got a huge parent company with a bunch of brands under it. And that's so much more valuable than an activity goal. Activity goals shouldn't even, those are like kind of training wheels. Like you don't really need activity goals once you like have time in a role under your belt. Like
totally. It makes me think of, you were almost doing the like 2025 outreach strategy that is now more popular, of like super tailored, targeted, understand your ICP super well, understand how to write a good message.
For reference for our listeners too, this was 2018 that I'm talking about. So it was a very long time ago. Outreach was like, it was in the dinosaur era.
It was when you could like get away with a little spray and pray of just like, if I just send a bunch of emails, I can book some meetings. I don't really have to.
We loved to spray and pray. Yeah.
In the SDR role that you originally started in, you were doing a few things that were outside of the scope to land this new marketing specific role. I'm assuming that there was a bit of a trend of continuing to do that. I'm curious how that played a role in your next role. So what did you start doing outside of that? What was kind of the next iteration for Jill's career progression?
Yeah, so the second role that I found myself in, the title that they gave it was a lead nurturing specialist. So like that's like a very niche job title. You really don't see that very often. And it kind of spoke to how they had set up the job. They knew what they wanted me to do. They knew they wanted me to nurture top of funnel leads, because it didn't really fall under what the SDRs were doing at the time. We know how like basic that process was, but they weren't valuable enough basically to pass off to the AEs. So I was filling that gap between those two departments. But when I started as an SDR, all of my processes were built out for me already. I knew how to go into the CRM, find all my leads. The sequences were built out. I knew what properties I had to update. I knew what reports I could go to see how I was doing. Like all of that stuff was there. And when I started this role, it was literally just like when a lead submits a form on our website, they're going to be assigned to you. And like, that was it. Like there was no like lead management process. I could go into the CRM and like find where the leads were, but like there was no longer someone like providing me like reports on how I was doing. There wasn't really a good process for like, even like the lead statuses that we had at the time in the CRM didn't really fit my process. And I was only owning contacts. The company was still sometimes owned by an SDR who might be outreaching other people, but I was following up with contacts, which you can just imagine all of the friction that caused.
I might have been part of the friction.
Yeah, I think everyone had a couple of times of being like, Jill, that's my company. They were like, we're happy you converted that lead and you got your thing, but like we were working against each other. There was so many issues with how the role was set up from the get-go, but I think it was really good for them to throw a person in there whose job was just to kind of figure it out, because not only did I then take over nurturing those leads, I kind of took over figuring out just where that kind of function sat within the company. Like I really had to like build out the process of how I was going to do it. And it became, because this SDR stuff was so structured, I kind of struggled with creating that structure with these leads because they were coming from all over the place. That was kind of how we ended up being allowed to send automated emails. I was getting like such a high volume of leads, and I had to send them all these emails. When they'd come back from events, they'd be like, well, you have to follow up with all of the leads an hour after the event ends. So I would be trying to send like 300 emails manually. Sequences in HubSpot had just started, and even the SDRs were only allowed to use task-based sequences. We're going way back in time for this one. So I remember having like a total breakdown and I was reporting half to the sales development director and half to the marketing director at the time. And I remember going to the sales development director and basically just being like, I can't keep sending this volume of emails. As you'll know from my SDR role, I wasn't really sending that high of a volume when I was in that role anyways. So sending hundreds of emails a day was a big thing for me. And I, again, ended up in that same thing where I was like, I'm writing these emails at least from scratch myself, but I can't personalize them and customize them because I'm still sending them out at a high volume. And that was when she sat down with me and was like, well, there's tools that can do that for you, right? And I was like, what do you mean? No one's ever told me this before. Why aren't we using that already? So I didn't even do it through sequences to start. We used an external tool, which was silly, but I did that. It eventually rolled into like the entire SDR team within 3 months of me using email automation, all of a sudden was allowed to automate their sequences because they saw me do it and they were like, this could work for everyone. And I was like, yeah, you really need to start letting people do that. It was crazy. Automation was like a dirty word. They thought, we've hired these say SDRs to do emails for us and we want them personalized. So why would we let them automate? They didn't really understand that balance of automation and personalization at the time. So I kind of dove into that area and was like, no, automation is still a huge part of it. You have to like scale up and personalize, but the only thing you should be doing to your email is personalizing it. You shouldn't be worried about like drafting it from scratch each time. So I kind of did that. I built out all of the like reporting on all of my stuff to be able to track all of the conversions and see like which kind of like tofu source I was getting the most success on, because then when I had a bunch of leads from different content types and different sources, I knew kind of which source to prioritize every time when I went in. And then I was feeding that back to the marketing team a little bit, where they would ask which content they should focus on, like building, or like they wanted to know how their content was performing. Basically, I think that's like a huge thing with sales marketing alignment that often gets missed, is that like marketing teams do really want to know like where they're producing the most leads for you, and sales doesn't always look at where their leads are coming from enough to be able to feed that back. So I had that relationship kind of locked into where I would let them know what was doing well so they could basically do more of it, and then make sure that they were focusing paid spend at the same time on the stuff that I was seeing the most success with. So it was a real like just I got thrown in feet first into like, well, not feet first, head first. I got thrown in head first. That's how it goes. To learning about like attribution reporting and how that kind of flows through marketing and sales at the same time. It became very obvious to me like how those departments work together. And it was really cool. It kind of like expanded my whole brain into kind of like how the whole sales funnel flows together in general, which was really cool.
And you fully just started building out these reports. You were seeing, okay, this is the information that this team needs from me. How do
I'll have
I
to find
get all
it.
of
Yeah.
this?
Yeah. Because like there wasn't a designated person diving into my stuff for me because I didn't sit on a team. So I kind of had to own the responsibility of doing my own reporting. And I had good managers at the time. It felt at the time really hard, but they would always question me. They'd always ask, how do you know that? Like, you're telling us something in a meeting, you're giving us an update. How do you know? I always had to come with data to back what I was saying. And I think that's a good thing to do. If someone's asking you that, like, don't get frustrated with them, find the data, because sometimes I would get in my head like, oh, I think this thing performs the best. But then I'd look and I'd be like, oh, they're actually pretty equal. Like, there isn't a standout one. Like, knowing what data is actually telling you versus just relying on the assumptions that you make, like, you need to know what the data is telling you. Your brain's biased. It doesn't always know. And I learned that lesson by actually like going into the data and trying to like break my own confirmation bias on things. When someone puts you in a position where you're forced to do that, it makes you more data literate, which is just like one of the most valuable skills I think you can have in any role. Like, every single person at a company should like have some form of data literacy, or at least be like focused on trying to improve that for themselves.
And whether you're going to go down the ops route that you've gone down and have been successful in, or you're going to stay sales, or maybe you're going to go CS, being able to build your own reports and understand data is so helpful.
Yes.
Like, just learn how to do that, please. Please. It's
Yes. Well,
so
especially I think if you're in sales and you want it, even if you like don't want to do what I did and go to ops, you want to be like a sales manager. The best thing a sales manager can do for their team is be able to look at the data they have on their team and make recommendations and build a better strategy for them. Because you do at the end of the day want your sales reps to just be doing as much sales as possible. And I think, yeah, as a sales manager, the biggest burden you can take on is like being that little mini data analyst that like knows how your team's doing, why they're doing it that way, and what you can kind of change and optimize at any time. I think a lot of sales managers, again, just rely on telling their teams what worked for them. But then as they move further out of the time that they were a sales rep and are a sales manager for longer and longer, things change and they don't realize. So yeah, having the data to back you up and just know what to tell your team is going to work for them. I think that's like so important.
Yeah. Even as a rep, I used to take the reports that were given to me from the team if I felt like I don't think that this really speaks to exactly how my
Yeah,
stuff's performing, and being able to like understand the report, build it out for your stuff specifically, like just being able to build reports and understand
to
data,
speak up for
so
yourself.
important. Even if you end up
That's
in a completely different department, just so important.
Yeah, you will always have people who will do reporting for you. If you want to be that sales rep who just does sales and you want to let operations, you want to let the data analyst, you want to let your manager do your reporting and tell you how you're doing, you can do that. But then you are giving them permission to tell you how you're doing without really like owning your own story. If you're able to look into those numbers, because they're looking at your numbers, but they're also looking at the wider team. No one is ever going to deep dive for you as hard as you will deep dive for yourself and really see what's going on. So if you have the skills to be able to look at those reports and kind of tell your own story through them instead of just leaving it up to the interpretation of other people, you kind of hold the power to just like speak to your work better and like advocate for yourself, because nobody will ever, especially if it's like a data analyst who does reporting for like sales, marketing, CS, like all of these departments, like they will never focus on you as an individual as much as you'll focus on yourself. If you can be your own data analyst and be like, this is how I'm doing, that's like the best gift that you can give yourself.
100%. And I know I'm about to like move us back in time to something else that you said, but I
Yeah.
think it's important to touch on. And I think that in general, this will lead us to some interesting conversation, I hope. But
Okay.
you mentioned around having two different managers that you were reporting to. So you were half reporting to
Yes.
sales, half reporting to marketing. I think that
Yeah.
some people will see that as, oh, that's like a great opportunity to be in front of two different leaders. Totally true.
Yeah.
There's also maybe an element of like, how do I make sure that I'm kind of meeting two different expectations, because sales probably has one metric, marketing another.
Yeah.
Like, how do I balance that? How do I make sure that I'm getting the mentorship that I want and need that early on in your career? Like, at this point, you're what,
Yes.
like 6 months into your career or less than a
Yeah.
year?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. The
I'm
first
curious.
year was crazy.
I'm curious how you navigated that.
Yeah. I think it was at the beginning, it didn't feel that hard because I already was really familiar with the director of sales development because she kind of headed up the department that I started in, right? So I already had a good relationship with her. It was just kind of building in the relationship from the marketing director. And they definitely came from two different sides, but it was just a good learning experience for me. Like I remember kind of tackling my conversations with them both differently and just seeing my goals as like a full thing of both. And I think I've kind of carried that forward into like all of my roles. Like I've never really had, especially the more specialized as I got, and even at the company I'm currently at, like I'll have someone who's like, I can manage you, but I don't really know what you do. And it changed, and that like that's okay. It's changed my relationship with how I kind of like work with managers versus like having mentors in my career. And I also think seeing that kind of divide of like your manager versus your mentor is something that like helped me grow more than someone who just leans on their manager for everything, because you will reach a point in your career, no matter what manager you have, that maybe you like surpass what they can teach you, or maybe you want to move into a different department than what they're doing, and your manager can't really help you with that. Like your manager should be your person that helps you like manage your workload, advocate for you if you have projects that you want to get started with other teams. They advocate for you to help you get like promotions and like raises and stuff, but they don't have to be the person that you do your learning from and help you with skill development and kind of like help you build out your career path. I think they can be that person, but I don't think you should ever feel lost if you have a manager that just is a really good people manager, but isn't the person that's going to like increase your skill development. I think that's where you kind of like branch out and kind of look around yourself in a company and be like, who else can I kind of like have on my team here? Who else will help me? And I think because I had two different managers, I learned that there wasn't really at the beginning like a clear divide of like one was a career development person and one was like a person manager. I think at the beginning there was definitely like smatterings of both across like different managers that I had, but I think the type of role that I was in really did force me to kind of like look for other people to help me with skill development in areas that weren't in that role that I knew that I needed to kind of build the role out how I wanted to build it out because I'd been given the autonomy to do that. So yeah, I think it can be something that's really daunting, especially if you're the kind of person that really likes structure and like really likes to like know how relationships are supposed to work. But I don't think having more people on your side is ever a bad thing unless they're a really bad manager. I can't speak to if you get a bad manager, like that sucks. You'll know you have a bad manager when they're not on your side. They're not advocating for you and they don't want you to grow. There's nothing you can do in that situation other than try to get yourself a different manager. Just get out. Don't mess around. But if someone's a really good people manager, just find your mentor. If you find someone who's maybe not a good people manager but is teaching you skills, you can still get something out of that, you know? Like I think those are the two different kind of like people you want above you at any given time. And that's how you can kind of like assess what you've got.
How did you go about finding mentors from, because how you're describing this, it's those two managers existed, you got different things from both of them, they both added a lot of
Yeah.
value, but it also, you said something that made it sound like maybe there were some other mentors that existed that weren't necessarily your
Yes.
managers. So I'm curious, like, how did you navigate finding those people? Kind of talk me through those relationships a bit.
Yeah, that was kind of the area where I really started moving into like doing more operational things. I think I reached a point in the role, and this kind of circles back to where we talked about like ownership at the beginning. It was just the role was creating too much friction because I was trying to work on the same accounts that the sales development team was working on. When it came down to how I switched between those two roles, that was really like the one thing that we could not fix. They were going to hire someone else in my role. It was going to create more friction with the sales development team. So as the volume increased, it didn't make sense to just have me doing it, but I knew that there was no point in hiring a counterpart because what I was doing already didn't work well. So basically what I ended up doing was being like, I can just tell the SDRs what I've been doing, how I've been nurturing these leads, how I've been building out these campaigns. They totally can write these emails themselves. They can embody the strategy. Like as someone who literally was them like a year ago, like I don't think that's going to be an issue. I'm pretty sure they can take it on. I think we should give the marketing leads to the SDRs. And I can try to move into something that's a little bit more like supporting them. And I think that's when I really started to learn about like sales enablement and how you can help a sales team without actually doing sales yourself. So the aspect of that I kind of covered was like, I had to build a lead routing workflow is essentially how I got into the operation side of things. And the way that our structure was set up, these top of funnel leads could come in for marketing at any time. I knew certain ones had to go to the SDRs, but there were some that came in that like would be from a company that a CS rep was kind of owning or a company already in our sales cycle. So when I looked at it, I was like, the only way for me to step back out of this role is to figure out a way to get these leads to the right people. And that was no longer something that I could really ask the managers I had for help. I had to find a person who was already doing that to help me kind of like make what I was envisioning come true. So I think if you have an idea, to find your mentor, you're probably going to find a person who can help you achieve something that you already want to do that you know is out of the skill set of your manager, I guess, to put it in like a very actionable way. Like you find your thing where you're like, I want to do that and I don't think my manager can teach me how to do that. Who at your company can do the closest thing to that? There will be someone in a role who's doing something similar, unless you're like doing something really crazy and like building out a whole tool, in which case you're probably good on your own if you have that kind of skill set. But I just went to someone who I knew had used the automation in our CRM before. And I was like, how would I build this out? And he kind of helped me there was a couple other workflows that we'd done in the past where he was like, and I think he was doing it. The first guy, at least, that was helping me with this stuff. I think as much as I wanted to learn how to do it, he also didn't want to have to do it for me. I would come to him and I'd ask him for these workflows, and he'd be like, this is a lot of stuff that I'm doing. Do you just want to learn how to do it? And then I don't have to do it anymore. And I was like, yeah,
I love
I'll
that.
do that. And I think if someone is trying to like, when people say things like that to you, take the opportunity and do it. Because if it's something that you don't want to do long term, you can always find someone to pass it off to in the long term, but taking it in and kind of mastering it is always like a good opportunity to take. And I think that's a good mindset to have in terms of like how you kind of approach taking things out of your job description anyways. Find work that someone else doesn't want to do that you want to do, master it, and then pass it off to someone else who wants to learn how to do it. That's kind of how I've gained all of my skills. I found things where I'm like, that looks interesting, I could do that. I ask the person who's doing it, do you want to be doing that? Can I help? 9 out of 10 times they're going to say, yeah, I don't want to do that anymore. That's kind of like, I'm kind of growing out of that. I take it over and then I pass it off to someone when I'm eventually like have also mastered it and ready to move on.
Yeah.
I will say, be very careful when you're taking on tasks like that to make sure that you don't just end up being like the dumping ground for someone's admin work that they don't want to do. Always be like really focused on like automation, optimization, make sure you're doing it in like the best, fastest, least manual way possible. But yeah, I just found the guy that was letting me do things that he would do that I wanted to do that made my skill set better. And then when he left the company, I found the guy that was taking over his role, and I would just like sit on, at this point it's 2020 and we're all working remotely from home. I would just sit on calls and I would watch him build things in the CRM. And like, if he was doing something for me, I was never like, can you do this? I would always be like, can we do this? Can I hop on a call while you build it so I can watch you? Like, it's so weird to ask to shadow people, but when you're trying to build hard skills like that, you have to see them doing it. You're never going to be able to do it, especially in a remote world. If you're just like on your computer by yourself at home, you have to find a way to like get someone who's actually going to let you see them do it so you can kind of start working from there. So yeah, I guess to kind of summarize, find the person who can do the thing that you want to do that you haven't done, and just try to shadow and absorb as much as you can from them. And don't be scared to ask questions. Like, especially if you found a mentor that's not your manager, like they're not going to judge you. You're not going to get like a ding on your performance review because they're like, oh, you actually asked a lot of questions that like revealed that you didn't know how to do that stuff. Like, nobody actually cares if you're revealing you don't know how to do something. If you don't ask, you'll never know how to do it. Just ask a million questions, learn how to do it all, and just keep kind of moving forward like that.
And with you, it seems like you had genuine curiosity, was asking from a place of like, I want to be able to do this on my own, not
Yeah,
just asking questions to like ask questions or asking the same questions over and over again.
yeah,
Another thing to take away from that is like people want to help you learn, people want to see you
they
succeed.
do.
People are
Yeah,
so willing to have you shadow them. It is awkward and uncomfortable sometimes to ask like, hey, I need help with this thing, can we like sit on a Zoom call and do it together? But
yeah,
everyone remembers the people who've done that for them in their career for the most part and are going to be willing to do that for you. Something else
100%.
I wanted to like really emphasize, because I think that it would be super easy to be lost on people listening to this right now. What Jill
Hmm.
explained is that she this is literally how you moved from sales slash marketing to operations. So I think it's so important
Yeah,
for people to understand that you can literally
we had
make
to
up
kind
your
of
own job.
gloss over that part. Yeah.
um, so essentially what I'm hearing happened, and please like cut in if I'm saying anything wrong, but Jill saw an issue happening. There was some friction being created because of this new role. She identified this issue, then identified a better way of doing things, and then pitched exactly how she could solve that problem for the company. And ultimately, like, outcome would be the company would make more money if they gave her this role. And she went
Yeah.
to leadership, pitched this position, then landed it, and then did everything in her power to be able to have all of the skills that she needed, whether it was like going and learning from people already in those, going outside of the company and finding resources to have that information. So just didn't
Yeah.
want to glaze over that.
Yeah. And I think to explain kind of like how I did that too, I went
Yeah.
from like a role that was very like, I was sending all the emails, right? Like that was the bulk of the role. I was still very much in a sales development focused role, even though I was
Yeah.
in between sales and marketing. So that was definitely something for leadership. They were like, if you're not sending the emails, what are you going to do? How are you going to add value? And that was kind of the piece that I entirely made up. I still did the sales enablement part of writing the sequences for the SDRs. So I saved them the time, because at that point I'd also become an expert in marketing content. I was able to make the sequences every time we had a new thing that they needed to follow up with leads on, but the friction was gone because it was a lead for their company. They could follow up with them.
Yeah.
I kind of managed the meetings that we would regularly have between marketing leadership and sales leadership, where we would talk about how the SDRs were doing with the leads and then get feedback with them on how that marketing content has performed. So I brought those two groups of management together with my knowledge of how to make those departments work together better, and got the managers in a room talking about it and working together in a way that we really hadn't had sales and marketing managers work together before. And then I just filled my time up with like, I was in the CRM, I was doing the lead routing, I was doing the reporting on the tofu leads. And I just realized there was so much other stuff in the CRM that I could do to support the marketing team that was related to it. I started managing the forms on our website. I was building out landing pages. I was helping with email marketing because that was like a segue. And a lot of that stuff I don't really do anymore, but it got me to the point where now I do like CRM admin work because I know all of these CRM tools, especially email marketing. That was when I really wanted to get out of as quickly as I could. But I'm happy that I did it, because now I can go into any role and they can say, how do you work with CRMs? And I can say I can do pretty much anything sales or marketing related in the CRM, and operations, because I can do automation. Like I can do all three of those departments. But it was very, very hard to have that conversation with my managers. And that was where having the confidence to be like, I know I can do it, also came in, because initially when I pitched the idea, they said, well, that's going to be a new role. It won't be the same job description. This isn't just like a streamlined like move for you. We're going to have to make a new job description. And if it's a new role and we get rid of the old role, we have to open it up internally to the team because it's a new role and available. And that's how it works. If there's a new role, everyone gets the chance to apply. So I was like, in that meeting, I was like, to clarify, we're going to get rid of my old role. You're going to make the job description that I just described to you, and you're going to make it available to other people. And they were like, yeah, that's how it would have to work. So I basically, they were like, are you sure you want to do that? And I was like, yeah, I do, because I feel really confident still that that is the right role. That's the role that would make sense for how this is going. But they did kind of test me. And to this day, I don't know if they were very like serious when they were doing that, or if they were just trying to be like, is she really saying this, or does she just want to get out of sending emails? Like, how much does she actually like think that this is the right thing to do, versus just like, is she trying to just like get rid of the part of the role she doesn't want to do? There was a little bit of like a test there. So there was about a period of like a week or two where I had said, yes, we need to get rid of the old role. Yes, this is the role we have to have. And I feel totally confident if you want to open it up to other people applying, I'm applying for it right now by making the role. So let's see who else is out there and thinks that they can do it better than me, who's literally doing it right now. Fortunately, they never actually followed through on that. It was kind of a crazy day too, because it was the day that we got announced that we were going to work from home during COVID was the day that they let me know that I got this role. So it was probably like the craziest day just environmentally in my entire career. But yeah, they sat me down and they were like, we got approval to get the role and we're just going to give it to you. You don't actually have to like compete internally with anyone for it. It's just going to be your role. We're not going to put it up. And I was like, thank God. But that was a test of them being like, are you sure? And I was like, I'm so confident in my idea. I've just done this for so long. I know the friction's there. I know this is a better way to do it. We have to do it this way. It's not about me. It's about the role and what I think is best for the company and how we're structuring things. And it was a huge risk, but I'm so glad I did it, because it also gave me confidence in like them letting me do it, that it's like, I went through all of that and I still got the job. So I was right. And it was the right thing for me to do, to like put myself in that spot. And I think it earned me like a lot of respect too, because it showed that I was kind of putting what I thought was best for the company ahead of even like my own job progression at that point. And I think you shouldn't necessarily do that all the time, just like willy-nilly. That's like a bad piece of advice to give people, but people will support you if they think that you're a team player and you want to do what's best for everyone. Even like over yourself sometimes. I think that that's something that like makes people really like trust you and want to like help you as an employee.
I'm that whole story is so badass. Just being like,
I don't know if
yeah,
I've ever told you that side of it before.
I didn't know that. You're like, yeah, post
Yeah.
it. I'll still get it. So wait,
I didn't say it that way. It was not
wait,
sounding that bad. It was
okay,
more
let's
me in a meeting room
paraphrase.
being like, okay, yeah, I guess we'll have to do it that way then. I'm not backing down, but like, what the hell? I definitely had some sleepless nights during that period where I was also like, oh my God, are we gonna work from home? What's happening? But you know what? It worked out.
Where where do you think that confidence came from? Was it truly like believing that this is the right thing? Like, I'm just because I'm sure that
I
there's a
think I
lot of
was,
people who wouldn't have been like, yeah, okay. They would have
yeah,
been like, oh, no, 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 backtrack. I'll do the emails. I'll send those. I'm not losing my job.
yeah, I had reached a point with the old role where I knew that I didn't want to do it anymore. I was like, if that role, I need to get out of that role. It's either moving into this new role or it's going somewhere else. I truly like reached a point where I tried everything I could do to make that old role work. It was really stressful. I think going through the whole process of learning, like getting email automation, like being allowed, like I really burnt myself out building that role out the way it was and sending all those emails manually and building processes and just being stressed about like the way that it was functioning. So I was kind of in like a you know what, if this is the end of my time at this company, then like goodbye. But we have to change this role. It's not working. I was really confident in just like my own, I don't even know how to describe it, just like my own experience. I
Mhm.
want to say like my own suffering, but like that sounds so like self-indulgent to be like, I was just confident that I was suffering and anyone else who was going to do this was also going to suffer. You know, like I was
Yeah.
just really true to
You knew it
myself
was a
about how I was
broken
feeling in
role.
that moment. Yeah, I knew that it wasn't working, and I was very honest with it. And because I had that relationship with those managers at the time, I could be completely honest with them. I didn't really hold back in saying like, this isn't fun for me. This isn't great. This role isn't working out. This other stuff that I'm doing feels a lot more right. And we can fix it by kind of making that segue between the two roles. So
Yeah.
having those managers that supported me made me at least want to try to make it work at that company. I think if I'd had bad managers, I might have just quit and left, and that might have been it. But it was kind of like all of those things aligned for me to be like, which I also think if there's any managers listening, that's another thing to keep in mind too. Like, I very much could have just become unhappy with that role and felt like I couldn't bring up my suggestions and just left, and they would have lost a person who would have built out another role for them. If someone's unhappy and they have an idea on how to make things better, like support them and kind of like work through it with them and see what they've got. Because I think a lot of talent gets lost at companies that way. But like people get unhappy and people don't listen to why they're unhappy and they leave and they take their skills elsewhere. And it's like there's a lot more you can do for people at that point than just be like, oh, your role's not working out, goodbye. You know, you never know what someone's going to come up with, and it might be better than what you came up with for them.
Yeah. There's definitely an element of you felt confident because you were given a little bit of space to try things and to push
Yeah,
some boundaries. I think there is a big part of like your personality also and having
yeah,
that kind of like inherent confidence within you, or at least like not letting that self-doubt win in any of those situations. But I think there's
yeah,
a lot that the managers can be doing in those situations to make people want to
yeah.
share
Like I got that
ideas.
confidence from them being confident in me. Like confidence
Yeah,
is something you find in yourself, but you can also pull it from other sources. And I think you are stronger if you're not just confident in yourself, but you also have a relationship where you know you have that confidence from other people. You know, like never stop looking for sources that make you feel confident and kind of like surrounding yourself with those. Like every person I worked through on my journey through that role help me build a little bit of that confidence. You know what I mean? And that's also why it's important to like reach out and have mentors and ask people questions and kind of build your network, because it is really hard to feel confident in yourself if you feel isolated in a role and like you haven't spoken about what your experience is like with other people. You don't know how they can help you if they don't even know that you're struggling. So
yeah,
confidence comes from kind of being honest about how you're struggling and then reaching out for support and getting it back. And that's where the confidence builds, is you're like, I'm not alone. I've got this, because they said I've got it and I know that they've got me even if I don't got it. So it's a whole cycle.
all right, so why don't we switch over every episode? I find it so valuable to ask every single guest what they wish they would have known earlier or sooner in their career. So why don't we
Yeah.
jump into that, Jill? What what do you wish you could go back and like tell little baby Jill, start of her tech sales career, then going into RevOps? Like what's that piece of advice that you wish that you had sooner, or maybe a few things that you wish you knew?
Yeah, this is definitely coming from like an ops lens now, because I
Yeah.
obviously am like a data girly and I work in operations, but data is your best friend. You're going to feel in your sales career like you're asked to track a lot of things, and it's going to feel very big brother of like, why am I tracking this? I don't want to have all this visibility on my work. It's really scary, but like it benefits you. Will you work at companies that want to big brother you a little bit? Yeah, but having all of that data also like tells you your entire story. It gives you leverage to like show what you've done. It gives you knowledge of like how you got the successes that you got. Every single data point that you can track through your sales cycle is just like super, super valuable. You should know them. And sorry, Stan.
Hi, Stan.
Yeah, every single data point that you can have helps you build your strategy. And if you know where that data lives and you can kind of build that strategy yourself, then you've just given yourself like a really good piece of knowledge where you can use that data to kind of support how you like grow in your career. Even if you choose, unlike me, to stay in sales, like you will never know how to be better and kind of like find your strategy if you're not looking at your data and kind of growing off of it. Which kind of segues into my second point, is to always do your own research on how the best way to do things are. Even as like a person now who does operations and builds up process in the CRM for sales teams, if someone comes to me and goes, hey, Jill, there's a tool we don't use in the CRM and I really want to use it, or I had this at my last company and we don't have this, could we do something like that? Like no one will ever get mad at you for them suggesting ways that you can help them better, unless they're like not very good at their job and they're kind of like guarded and petty. Like most people who are good at their job will be happy for you to come to them and be like, I would love you to build this out. They'll be like, yeah, that's amazing. I would love to do that for you. I would, in the role that I'm in now, if any of my sales reps came to me and said, I don't like the way that I'm doing this, how can I do it better? That is like something that I love to see in a salesperson. And when I see people doing that, I know that they're going to like have a really good career, because I'm like, they are already taking care of themselves. They're saying no to doing things the wrong way and they're looking for a better way to do it. Whenever I see someone being told to like take data that's in the CRM and fill it out in like a sheet, and like when they're being given these processes where they have to like fill things out very manually, and just like, you get told as a salesperson all the time, people be like, what are you doing? You have to tell it to me in this way. Everything should live in an automatically tracked tool, your CRM. Like that is your best friend. If somebody asks you to put it in a sheet, you can tell them where it is in the CRM. That's not a cheeky thing to do. Like they should probably already know how to do it in their role if there's someone who's asking you for that. That's a little sassy of me to say, but it's true. And that kind of segues into my third piece of advice, is that your time is your most valuable asset. Do not waste your time feeling like you have to go through and like build out really long-winded reporting things as a salesperson, or like that you have to write down all of the only thing that you should be writing down is like notes of what happened on your call that don't live in a data point in the CRM. I see a lot of salespeople building out these like sheets that they like to refer to, and it'll be like the date that they started talking to someone, the next step, like all of these things. And I'm like, you're literally rebuilding the CRM in a spreadsheet for yourself. Like that is the CRM. It just looks a little different. And I love that you're doing it, because it's showing me that your brain wants that, but you have to learn how to do it in the tool, because you're going to save yourself so much time. People who don't know how to do that will constantly be asking you, or people who just like don't have very good reporting processes when you're early in your career, they'll probably be passing you down spreadsheets and asking you to organize them for them. That's just something that's something that early in my career, I constantly got people sending me sheets and being like, here, if you do this sheet for me, that's like a really nice thing that you can do when you're searching for opportunities to kind of like upskill and you're asking people how you can help. Being given a spreadsheet they want you to manually go through and populate will probably be a task that people give you. Before you go through and manually populate it, you're like nodding, being like, wait, Jill, I actually think you might have sent me some of those. So like it can become just like a really bad chain. And I know this because I've fallen into the trap of, I would be in a role where someone would give me a sheet to fill out and I'd find an intern to do it for me, because I'm like, this isn't worth my time. Someone needs to stop the chain and figure out the way to do it in an automated way. And if you know the CRM and you know data, 9 out of 10 times, you're going to look at that sheet and be like, you just didn't export this from the source right. You left out a million different data points that you want. And ideally, you find a way where you don't even need to export it into the sheet. You can just do it all in one tool. That's never your job as a salesperson. That is the job of your operations people, is to put your systems together in a place where you have everything you need in one spot. But don't be afraid to say no to filling out sheets manually and then sending it back to people and being like, fine, we have to find a way to do this in an automated way. Where does that data live? And that's a question you can ask. Like if someone's asking you to fill out a sheet, I think the easiest way to kind of start heading down that road is be like, well, how would I know that? How would I know that data point that I'm putting in there? And if you go looking for that data point and where it lives and you realize it's something that's automatically tracked somewhere for you, like something that I see often is like people indicating in a sheet if they've reached out to something or if not. And those all live in activity properties in the CRM. You can just direct people to those. So always asking like, how do I know that? Where does the data point live? And following that chain of like, how do I know it? It also ties into my advice where I've been telling people on this call, like, do everything data backed. Always question how you know things, because that is what kind of guides you down, like even learning what data points you have and making sure that you're telling the right story because you're telling what the data says. So yeah, we've kind of gone all over the place between the three of those, but knowing that data is your best friend and really harnessing it, not letting anyone else kind of like tell your story for you, like be data literate enough to the point that you can kind of dig into things yourself, speak to your own successes, and really use it to kind of like advocate for yourself in your role. And then just using your time wisely. Know what you can automate, know what can be done for you, know what's worth your time versus just like what people are asking you because they don't want to do it themselves. If you can nail all three of those things, you're laughing. You're gonna have the best year ever.
I love it. Well, thank you, Jill. I think that everybody listening to this, whether they're an SDR, whether they're wherever they are in their career, whether they're wanting to be an ops or not, will take something from this, all the way from talking about the start of your career, just like having that confidence in your soft skills and being like, hey, I can actually do this, all the way through to identifying gaps in companies and just making up roles to make things better for the big picture. And then now being in a role where you are, being that mentor for folks and continuing to use data every single day to make processes better and optimize and make everything as efficient as possible. One thing that I did want to touch on quickly before we go is just like, if people are interested in seeing like what you're up to, or, interested in maybe there's an SDR listening to this. It's like, I want to be an ops person. Like, how do I do that? And they want to talk. Like,
Yeah.
how would the best way to get in touch with you be?
Definitely feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm gonna talk the talk and walk the walk that I've been saying, where if anyone wants to reach out and just like hear more about my role or walk through like a problem that they've been having, I'd be more than happy to do like a coffee chat with anybody, because as I've kind of shown on this call, that's exactly how I got where I got to. And I'm always happy to provide that advice to anyone who's kind of looking to upskill in their career if they feel that there's something that I can offer to them. You don't have to be wanting to go into ops to have something for us to chat about. So yeah, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and you know that you watched the podcast maybe when you send the connection, so I know where you're coming from. But yeah, I'd be happy to chat with anyone who listens.
Love it. Well, thanks so much for your time, Jill.
No, thank you, Kelly. This has been really, really awesome. And yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great.
So that's a wrap on episode 3 of Her Mentor. If you enjoyed listening to Jill's story, please reach out to her. She is awesome. She's willing to have conversations with folks who are in the tech space as well. And then if you're enjoying Her Mentor, the podcast, please leave us a rating wherever you're listening to this podcast. It means a lot to me and helps make sure that our space and our community can continue to grow. I'll be here same time next week with our next guest. But if you don't want to have to remember when to come check our page, make sure that you are following us on Spotify or subscribe to us on YouTube. Okay, that's all. Yay!